A fumbled hand grenade. As even his CEO supporters brace for the concussive blast of the Trump tariffs, we are being told it is not going to hurt. Meanwhile, our rivals covering their ears are excited for what's next. By Jacob Ward. President Trump's Liberation Day performance last week, standing in the Rose Garden with a placard in hand to announce seemingly random tariffs on a long list of countries, was quickly picked apart for its foolishness by the business media and business community. The Economist's economics editor, Henry Kerr, for instance, called the plan crackers. The nation's top corporate trade association, Business Roundtable, warned of, quote, major harm to American manufacturers, workers, families, and exporters. And everyone soon started figuring out the strange, stupid math of the tariffs. CBC's Andrew Chang did a particularly solid job of breaking it down, as did the Wall Street Journal, which first pointed out that the effective tariff rates are now higher than they were after the Smoot-Hawley Act, which helped push the United States into the Great Depression. Then they got into the math. Worse is the bizarre, slapdash way the White House calculated the tariff rates on individual countries, the Wall Street Journal wrote. Everyone will pay 10%. Then the White House appears to have calculated each country's additional tariff rate by dividing its trade deficit with the U.S. by its exports to the U.S. This rate was then cut in half for most countries, which Mr. Trump calls a discount. The discordant result is that U.S. adversaries like Iran, 10% tariffs, and Venezuela, 15%, will pay lower rates than friends in Europe, 20%, Japan, 24%, and Taiwan, 32%. Now, as every talking head went on to explain over the weekend, dividing a nation's trade deficit by its exports to the U.S. assumes that every nation is supposed to buy exactly the same amount from the U.S. as it sells. But that doesn't account for the way that some countries have come to specialize in certain goods and services, from coffee to semiconductors. If every nation had a perfect balance of goods to buy and sell, there'd be no reason for economic strategy, no opportunity for economic growth, and no incentive for foreign investment. In January 2023, at the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, I saw the possibility of a new world order rising in front of me. I was standing in a vast showroom of luxury EVs I could not identify. The sales literature spoke of Italian design and German engineering. I ran a hand across the leather seats. I admired the aggressive bodywork. "Excuse me," I asked a man working the floor, "where are these cars made?" "Vietnam," he said proudly. CES, as the show is known, has traditionally been a meeting place for companies and their manufacturers, an event where the rest of us ogle the gadgets while hands shake in private rooms over outsourcing deals. And the dominant outsourcing nation at that show for decades was, of course, China. Thousands of representatives of factories and fabricators from cities like Shenzhen and Guangzhou occupied one vast hall of the gathering, awaiting potential clients. But in January 2023, there was a new section of the show set aside for Vietnam and another for India. Those nations, which I'd never seen before in Vegas, were there to offer their companies as the new outsourcing partners for the United States as our tensions with China grew. The United States already accounts for roughly 30% of Vietnam's exports. A third of our shoes are made there, including half of the Nikes we wear. And over the last 2 years, Vietnam has been growing as a manufacturing source for smartphones, televisions, integrated circuits. What I was witnessing at CES was truly the rise of a post-China global order. That is all over now. Tariffs are a hand grenade, one you traditionally wave around to threaten your economic rivals by setting a new, horrifying tone in the room. But no one expects anyone to actually throw the grenade at their own feet in the middle of the meeting. When the Trump administration threatened Vietnam with tariffs last month, the country saw the grenade in our hand and prepared to negotiate over its own tariffs on U.S. imports. The expectation was that a duty of as much as 10% might be imposed on their exports to us, a frightening grenade indeed. But the negotiations never happened, and the Trump administration pulled the pin anyway. Now, the live grenade has been fumbled under the car seats where it is rattling around, and the damage is going to be worse than anyone expected. Vietnam faces tariffs of 46%. Thailand will see 36%. Cambodia, which has been trying to grow past its reliance on tourism and garment exports, will suffer a staggering 49%. Russia is not among the countries on the long list. Tiny Lesotho is for some reason among the hardest hit. It depends on exports like textiles and diamonds to the United States for 10% of its GDP. An economist told NBC News that these inexplicable tariffs mean the tiny southern African nation, quote, will be dead. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent told reporters on the day of the announcement that Americans have nothing to worry about. When asked about the added cost of imported goods in the United States, Bessent said, quote, I'm not sure why Americans would have to pay more in the short term, and proceeded to claim that upcoming tax cuts will balance things out for working Americans. Quote, we don't know what the price effects are going to be, he told NBC News in a moment of either outright dishonesty or personal confusion, frightening either way from the nation's chief financial officer. Reporters didn't seem to know what to do with his insistence that his hand grenade wouldn't hurt when it goes off. I'm not sure how I would have even handled that moment. The logic of the Trump administration seems to be that making imports unaffordable will inspire us to do it all ourselves. As CNN reported from the Rose Garden, it's our declaration of economic independence, Trump said Wednesday. Jobs and factories will come roaring back into our country, and you see it happening already. But this, as usual, is not true. If the tariffs are the arrow, uncertainty is the poison, and American companies are doubled over with it right now. Should a CEO invest in a Mexican factory where production is cheaper? No, bad idea. Tariffs will wipe out those savings. But what if President Trump changes his mind in a month and a U.S. factory winds up costing far more than a Mexican factory does? Oh no. This is not a theoretical dilemma. Former Obama Treasury official turned private investor Stephen Ratner reported this weekend that an official from the first Trump administration recently told investors on a private call that automobiles built in Mexico wouldn't be hit with the same tariffs as those coming from Canada. Then, both countries were hit with the same tariffs. Better to just sit tight. And that's where we're at. The S&P Global Flash Factory Gauge, which measures any, quote, roaring back, found that U.S. factory activity is slipping. M&A activity hit a 20-year low in the first quarter. While the jobs report on Friday was sound, consumer confidence is at a 12-year low. And prediction markets, which I hate for philosophical reasons, but which continue to be surprisingly accurate at forecasting things like Trump winning the White House a second time, have put the odds of a recession above 50% since Wednesday. Here's how world leaders are reacting. Singapore's prime minister said on TikTok that his and other countries have long called for reform when it comes to international trade, but, quote, what the U.S. is doing now is not reform. It is abandoning the entire system it had created. Its new approach of reciprocal tariffs is a complete rejection of the World Trade Organization framework. German Vice Chancellor and Economy Minister Robert Habeck told ABC News that Liberation Day should instead be called Inflation Day for American consumers, and that, quote, the U.S. mania for tariffs could set off a spiral that could also pull countries into recession and cause massive damage worldwide. Is all of this some brilliant secret plan to reset the world economic order in America's favor? We were already the planet's most vibrant and reliable economy, so it's not clear what improvements we were after. Perhaps it will all be worth it because we'll stick it to China, our closest economic rival. They now face a combined tariff rate of above 60% after all, but they're not backing down. On Friday, they declared a 34% tariff on U.S. imports. And reporting by the Financial Times' Martin Wolf last week suggests a scenario that could truly cut the United States out of the future global economic order. Wolf had just returned from China, whose leaders were preparing for a deeply damaging short-term wound from its largest trading partner and fiercest economic competitor. Wolf writes that China is, of course, worried about the immediate effects, but he points out that China experienced something very similar to what President Trump is imposing on his own nation in the form of Mao Zedong's purges of bureaucrats and academics and other elites. The chairman's hollowing out of Chinese education and innovation set that nation back to a place of intellectual and economic stagnation that it took decades to escape. In the U.S., Wolf says, the Chinese are seeing a repeat of their history. As President Trump purges American universities, directly damaging our single greatest economic strength, our ability to innovate, and especially to innovate our way out of trouble, China sees a chance to take advantage of our misfortune on the world stage. The Trump administration, and seemingly Trump himself, seems to have somehow relished the waving of the grenade. They wanted to do it so badly they forgot to put it down once everyone backed away. It will hurt everyone. And while it will do permanent generational damage to nations like Lesotho that have no other prospects, the nation it's most intended to hurt is already looking forward to the aftermath. While China holds its ears and prepares to suffer the concussive blast of the grenade we've dropped, it's getting ready to take advantage of how wounded we will be and how long it will take us to recover, because as it well knows, it could take us a long, long time. Okay, one last thing. All of this unfolded over the course of only 4 days. But one worthwhile fact to note is that the president played golf for 2 of them, and that included Friday. 60% of American households own stock, and on Thursday it was already clear that the effects on investment and retirement accounts was going to be deep and painful. But that night, he flew to Florida. On Friday, waking at Mar-a-Lago, he began the day by posting, "This is a great time to get rich," on Truth Social, and then he headed to the links. That day, the Dow, the S&P 500, and the NASDAQ all continued to fall, dropping more than 5% each, the worst market collapse since the pandemic. Meanwhile, Trump was shuttling between golf courses, double booked at simultaneous tournaments, paying him to be on 2 of his properties. The AP in 2022 estimated that Marine One, the helicopter that set Trump down at each of these events, costs between $16,700 and $20,000 taxpayer dollars per hour. Now, the live tournament at Trump National Doral is, of course, Saudi-backed. Teeing off there was, among others, Yasser Al-Rumayyan, the head of Saudi's sovereign wealth fund, which put $2 billion into Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner's private equity firm after Trump's first term. As the Wall Street Journal reports, President Trump is expected to travel to Saudi Arabia soon. That would be his first foreign trip of his second term. Saudi is the host of U.S. brokered negotiations between Ukraine and Russia, and Saudi has committed more than $600 billion in investments in the U.S., according to the White House. I do not envy the poor Fox News correspondent assigned the unenviable job Friday of coming up with flattering profiles of Trump as a great ambassador of the game. Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell, arguably the last independent office holder in the United States, told a conference that the tariffs and their likely effects on inflation are, quote, significantly larger than expected, according to the Associated Press. Powell, whose term ends 13 months from now, predicted, quote, at least a temporary rise in inflation. He then added, quote, it is also possible that the effects could be more persistent.